What's your darkest secret? Story 1. Once a woman ran up to me at a notoriously rough corner in town. I thought I recognized her, as she ran and hugged me immediately. She backed off and started babbling incoherently. She was clearly one of the many mentally ill individuals struggling with addiction in the area. A few minutes later, she did the same to a man around 50 years old. He got very inappropriate with her, pushing her against a bus stop and stating in a dark, matter-of-fact tone, "You're coming home with me tonight." She kept looking down, half in tears, mumbling, and shaking her head while he touched her inappropriately. I'm generally very disturbed by assault. An exchange student at my former school was attacked in an alley, and I had recurring dreams about stumbling upon it and defending her violently. And I was very intoxicated at the time. So I started calling him out. He shouted back at me and I backed down. Then he grabbed her by the wrist and started pulling her toward the alley. I was terrified, emotional, intoxicated, and furious, she screamed. I pulled a whiskey bottle from my bag, yelled at him, and got hit in the face. I hit him back with the bottle. She ran, I hit him again, and he fell. While he was on the ground, I struck him with the bottle several times. The last time it shattered over his face. Then I gave him one final blow across his cheek area, possibly hitting his eye. I ran away crying and then threw up. This is the only time I've ever been in a fight, and it made me a little afraid of myself. Story 2. When I was about 9, my dad was wrongly diagnosed with several psychological conditions. His psychiatrist put him on so many medications that I barely recognized him anymore. He was emotionally absent, which led to everything that followed. My dad remarried. My stepmom had 3 children, 2 boys and 1 girl. I was 9 at the time. My brothers were 5 and 13, and my sister was around 7. My oldest stepbrother repeatedly hurt my younger brother and sister. This spiraled into more issues, similar behavior between the 2 youngest kids, along with serious acting out. My little brother used to run around the house throwing things. Yes, literally. He would do this when misbehaving, but mostly when my oldest brother was chasing him. I would sometimes wake up to find him hurting them and telling them to stay quiet. I still remember the expression on his face during those moments. I'll never forget it. Eventually, he was placed in juvenile detention. My stepmom used to force me to sleep outside on the ground. If I fell asleep inside, she would wake me up, drag me out by whatever limb she could grab, and leave me outside. No blanket, no pillow. Just me, whether it was 100 degrees or 25. It didn't matter. I was also locked out of the house whenever my dad was at work. The moment he left, my stepmom would make my life unbearable. Physical and emotional mistreatment was constant. I bring up the medication because my dad was an amazing father and my best friend, and in his right mind, he never would have allowed that. He eventually saw a different doctor, got on new medication, and left her. But that period was absolute hell. I still remember the day everything collapsed. My dad and stepmom were screaming at each other, and my dad finally told her he was leaving. Then he looked at me and told me to get my stuff. Story 3. Throwaway, I've always looked after my little brother and stepped into the role our dad left behind. I'm 26, and my brother is 15. One day my brother broke down crying, and I thought, this has to be something serious. Maybe our mom is sick or a girl broke up with him. I asked what was wrong, and he said he wanted to be a girl. I laughed, thinking he was pulling one of his pranks. He's good at them. Smart kid. But he kept insisting. Usually, he would eventually admit it was a joke, but not this time. I was shocked. It felt surreal. We talked for a couple of hours, and because I love him, I supported him and shared what little I knew about being transgender. He said he hated pretending and wanted to wear girls' clothes and everything that came with that. So now, whenever he comes to stay with me on weekends, he dresses in more feminine clothing and wears makeup. I always refer to him as her, and she goes by Brittany. It's a little outside my comfort zone, but I can tell how much it means to her to feel accepted here. We still play video games, watch movies, but she stopped working out with me because she doesn't want to build muscle anymore. So my little brother becomes Brittany on weekends and embraces it completely. Her voice was already soft and kind of neutral, but when she tries, she really pulls it off. Though I can still hear hints of my brother in a few words. The hardest part is that I never have the house to myself on weekends. She always wants to stay with me because it's her favorite time, and I can't bring myself to say no. She's really unhappy during the week. She passes as a girl pretty well, and I doubt most people would notice. I tell her she looks pretty, and if she starts hormones like she plans to, she'll probably have no trouble. But that's all in the future. Our mom would probably lose it if she found out. A, she wants to be a girl. B, I knew. And C, I helped her. I love my sibling and think of myself as a guardian. I try to be supportive, even if it feels strange sometimes. I'm pretty conservative, but it's my sibling, you know? One more thing. I took her to an amusement park this summer, and she went as Brittany. She joked that people might think we were on a date. It wasn't funny to me. The things we do for love. Story 4. When I was very little, probably around 3 to 4, I used to play a game with my parents where I'd go to the bathroom and brush my teeth before bed. And when I got to my room, they'd pretend to be asleep. And I'd find creative ways to wake them up. Being so young, I thought my dad was superhero-style indestructible. And thinking that way, I decided to try something that would hurt a kid like me, but wouldn't harm him at all since he was big. I found a pencil laying on the desk and tried to poke him in the eye with it. Luckily, he was peeking and stopped me just before I did it. To this day, it gives me a sinking feeling in my stomach, thinking about what might have happened. Story 5. Okay, so typical mistreated child situation. My parents divorced and I was placed in foster care for what felt like either a year or a few months. It's kind of blocked out. I was about 8, and this older kid named Richie was around 14, and a textbook example of someone who enjoyed causing others harm. A lot of disturbing stuff happened. He handcuffed me and kept me restrained until I yelled for my foster mom. He hurt me physically, even stood on my head once. And there was repeated mistreatment, both physical and emotional. I was also forced into acts against other younger foster kids in the home, and he made subtle but terrifying threats. It was relentless and terrifying. Anyway, considering that, I guess I could be doing a lot worse. But I still worry sometimes. I've had multiple dreams filled with distressing themes, bloodied female figures, women passing away in a repeated and disturbing way. In the dreams, it's never me doing it. I'm always just witnessing it. In one dream, someone was trying to harm my current girlfriend, and I reacted violently in her defense. I occasionally wake up and feel confused by the intensity of these dreams. My girlfriend has told me there are times I've woken up and started initiating intimacy while still half asleep. And when she tells me no, I stop and go back to sleep. Anyway, it's troubling to feel like my mind has linked emotions, trauma, and physical closeness in a way that's hard to fully understand or explain. Story 6. Went to a strip club one night. Unwillingly, I might add. It was only my second time at one of these places. It was a few days before payday. I was almost broke. I went with a bunch of people I didn't even know. Dancers kept coming and going, giving me table dances and flirting a lot. The more I drank, the more I was getting into it. One girl came up and said, $50 gets you in the back with her. I went to the back and she instantly took my pants off, put a condom on me, and we were intimate. After everything was said and done, she asked for more money. She never mentioned any additional charges beforehand. Next thing I knew, I was sitting in a chair in the main room with 2 bouncers and the manager telling me they were going to break both my arms and call the police if I didn't come up with $300 immediately. Of all people, I called my boss at the time. He showed up, paid the dancer, and everything was settled. He even ended up getting a dance himself. Very few people know this. I haven't been back to another strip club since and don't plan to. I was 21 when it happened, just days before my 22nd birthday. Story 7. When I was 11 years old in 2006, my baby sister drowned in our backyard swimming pool and passed away while I was at my father's house for the weekend. I was very close to my sister. I loved her with all of my heart. My mother often talks about how much she misses her, and I agree. There's only one problem. I have almost no memory of my sister. My mom doesn't know this, and I don't understand why it's so hard for me to remember. I obviously remember what she looked like, but I can't remember how she acted or how I was with her. I can only recall a few moments we shared. One of those moments was when I was swimming in the pool, trying to do backflips, yelling out to my mom, "Mom, watch me." My mom was holding my sister and talking to her, so she didn't hear me. I, being selfish and impatient, yelled at the top of my lungs, "Stop babying her!" then stormed up the deck and into the house. I have no idea why that moment is so clear, but none of the good ones are. There's another moment that I dream about all the time. On the day she died, as I was getting in the car to go to my dad's house, She jumped into the car and gave me a tight hug goodbye. I don't know if that moment actually happened or not, but it feels so real when I think about it. I really hope it happened. I don't know if this is a dark secret or not, but it is a secret. One that I have almost no memories of someone I love so deeply. I needed to get this out. Story 8. I'm in my early 30s and I've never, ever told a single soul this. I lied. I had to. I was 12 years old and I didn't know what else to do. So I lied. There was no other way for me to cope. When I was 11, my mother placed me into a mental institution. I was angry, extremely angry. I was the classic, out of control, troubled child, always in trouble with the police, constantly getting into problems at school. By the time I was 11, I had 3 misdemeanors and 2 felonies. My felonies were arson and assault. I had set fire to a field, hoping it would spread to an apartment building, and I attacked my teacher with a screwdriver, seriously injuring her. Looking back at all the chaos I caused, all the times I tried to harm myself, I don't know how my mother managed to keep going. I had tried to hurt myself in multiple ways, and honestly, there was no specific reason for it. No abuse, no neglect. I grew up in a poor, single-parent household. My older brother and I were latchkey kids, home alone after school until our mom returned from work. When I was institutionalized, I completely lost control. I became a different person. With no clear reason for my behavior, I lashed out. My first year, I spent a lot of time in the quiet room, a small rectangular room with rubber walls and floors, where you couldn't seriously injure yourself. I think my longest stretch in there was about 4 days straight, but I was in there at least half the week because of how uncontrollable I was. I would stab staff members with pens or pencils, attack randomly, and my mood would switch in seconds. The staff had to shut down the whole floor just to move me to the quiet room. When I was almost 13, they built a new building to house us. I was the second person moved in. I would spend the next 3 years there. When I wasn't in isolation, I was in therapy. Individual, then group, then lunch, then more therapy. Every day, the psychologist tried to dig into my past to find a cause for my rage. Were you hurt, neglected, abused? I told them the truth. None of those things happened. I was just angry. Eventually, after 2 years of being questioned constantly about what I was hiding, I shut down. I was placed on a room program, confined to a room 24 hours a day. It had no windows and one door. I had started with a dresser and bed, but those were taken away after I threw the drawers and banged on the frame. My room became completely empty. I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone and had only one individual therapy session per day. Meals in my room, one short shower a day. After 6 months like this, I couldn't take it anymore. One day in therapy, I broke. I told my psychologist I had mistreated my brother and claimed it was because I had been harmed myself. When asked who did it, I made up a story about sneaking out to a store late at night, meeting strangers, going to parties, and being hurt there. I don't know why I said it, but at the time it made sense. What happened next was worse than everything before. My mother and brother were brought in for counseling. I had to repeat my story in front of them. My brother, who has cerebral palsy and memory issues, couldn't even defend himself. He had no memory of anything. I'm sorry if this is poorly written. It's hard to organize thoughts I haven't shared in 18 years. The next 2 years were worse. The story grew as therapy pushed me further. I claimed to have multiple personalities. For 2 years, I pretended. I even had a 4-hour session where we said goodbye to 2 of them. My mom and brother, who I loved, cut me off completely. No contact for 2 years. I lied because the pressure was unbearable. No one knows. My family still believes what I said. For the next 10 years, whenever I was around nieces or nephews, I could feel people watching me, judging me. I feel empty. I don't want to read this again, so sorry if there are any mistakes or parts that are hard to understand. Story 9. I was starting 8th grade. Hormones were hitting hard, and girls and romance were all I could think about. This was the early 90s before the internet was mainstream, but I had discovered BBS message boards. I was pretty tech savvy and knew how to connect, play games like Legend of the Red Dragon, and chat with people. My biggest goal was to talk to a girl. I don't remember how it began, but I eventually found someone, and we started chatting. It got flirty, and soon we were talking on the phone for hours. That's when I found out she wasn't just a girl. She was a grown woman. She said she was 32. I lied and told her I was 23. I had a deep enough voice to pass for older, and somehow it worked. She was also married, but told me her husband didn't mind. At that age, I didn't care. I thought I was clever for pulling it off. Our conversations became more personal and intense over time. Eventually, I felt comfortable enough to admit I was actually younger, around 17. She was surprised and distant at first, but after some time, we reconnected. We even talked about meeting. We arranged to meet at a mall. I saw both her and her husband in person. We talked and had a quick meal, nothing outrageous. For someone my age, it felt like a wild, surreal moment. I was a teenager meeting someone I'd only talked to online, someone I thought I knew. We kept in touch, and one day we planned for me to visit them again. I told my parents I'd be spending the night at a friend's place, and instead I met up with them for what was supposed to be a casual hangout. We stopped at a few stores, joked around, bought some silly stuff, and went out to eat. They treated it like a fun day out. Later we went to a hotel and just talked more. At one point they offered me some alcohol, and being inexperienced, I accepted. It was the first time I'd had a drink, and it hit me fast. I remember feeling a little dazed, but everything seemed playful. We had dinner, laughed, and just hung out. It was a bizarre mix of teenage thrill-seeking and adult weirdness. The next morning, they dropped me off near my house. I walked up and rang the doorbell. My dad answered and hugged me immediately. He was in tears, asking where I'd been. That's when it hit me. My parents had no idea where I was, and they had been terrified. They had called my friend's house, learned I never showed up, then contacted everyone they could. Eventually, they had called the police. I panicked. I couldn't tell them where I'd actually been. It would devastate them. So I came up with a lie. I said I had met someone online who was into tech and wanted to teach me about computers. It sounded silly, but I'd always been known as a computer kid. Somehow it worked. Still, I had to talk to the police. I was nervous, especially when they pulled the classic good cop, bad cop routine. But I stuck to my story. This was a different time. People weren't as familiar with online risks. I never gave any names. My parents grounded me hard, took away my computer, my phone line, everything. I had no way to call her again, but I found a payphone eventually and let her know what had happened. We agreed to cool off for a while. Over time, I lost interest in reaching out. I didn't know if it was guilt or just the way things played out, but it started to feel wrong. Months later, I called again. Her husband answered, and he sounded broken. He said something had happened. Their daughter had passed away in a tragic accident. They believed it was punishment for everything that had happened. The husband blamed me. That was the last time I ever spoke to them. I don't remember their names anymore, and honestly, I'm not sure I want to. For years, I thought I was in control, that I had initiated all of it. But now looking back, I wonder how anyone could ever mistake a kid for someone much older. The whole situation feels darker than I understood at the time. I still think about it and wonder what really happened. Story 10. A few years ago, I started talking to a girl who lived in Florida while I was in Georgia. We only met once in person, but it was a powerful connection. We really cared about each other, but things weren't easy. She had been through a lot. She had lost her mother just before her birthday, and not long before we met, she had been through a traumatic experience involving someone she had once trusted. It left deep emotional scars. She had to take care of her younger siblings, a teenage sister and a younger brother. She was barely holding it together but was determined to support them. For a while, things between us worked out. Then a friend of hers from work needed a place to stay and ended up moving in with them. I warned him not to cause trouble, and for a while everything seemed okay. That summer they made plans to come visit me, but ended up going to Michigan instead. Her sister had experienced a pregnancy scare, which she originally said was related to a boyfriend from back home. Later she told me it had been a miscarriage. I didn't think too much of it and just assumed she needed space. Eventually I found out that the situation had been far worse than I ever imagined. The person who had moved in with them had hurt her sister. The truth came out that he had committed serious acts of violence against both my girlfriend and her sister. He eventually took his own life after everything he had done. The baby was born, and for reasons I still don't understand, was named after me. The weight of everything took a serious toll on her mental health. My girlfriend passed away a short time later, overwhelmed by the trauma and pain. Not long after that, her younger sister also passed away. The only ones left were the baby and their youngest sibling. The baby ended up being placed with relatives in Florida. Her younger brother went to live with extended family overseas. I still think about them. I wish I could have done more to help. I was just a kid myself trying to support someone I cared about, and it never felt like enough. Story 11. I was 8. I have a little brother with severe autism. He's 2 years younger than me. One day my mom called to me from upstairs and told me to bring my little brother downstairs because Sesame Street was going to be on. He doesn't talk but can walk, only very slowly. We got to the top of the stairs and started walking down. I got frustrated that he was moving so slowly and poked him to get him to hurry up. Then a step later, he stepped on my toes. Furious, I poked him again, telling him, "No!" I scared him, and he moved his arm suddenly, accidentally hitting me with his elbow. I shoved him in response. Unfortunately, he has very poor balance, so he went tumbling down the stairs, crashing headfirst into the wall. He didn't move. Terrified, I screamed for my mom and made up a story on the spot about how he tripped, and I couldn't catch him in time. An ambulance was called, and he was rushed to the hospital. He had internal bleeding and almost didn't make it. He ended up with permanent brain damage on top of his autism. His memory is even worse than before, and he will probably never learn to speak. The worst part is, to this day, my parents thank me for being such a good big sister. Even when I bring it up, they praise me, telling me I acted quickly and that it was obviously not my fault. But it is my fault, and I will carry that guilt forever. Story 12. Not all that dark, but I've never told anyone my revenge story. When I was 10 years old, my mom sent me to a summer camp in another county. I knew 2 other people there, and we were placed in the same cabin. The other cabin was full of local kids who had been attending for years. I was a fat, awkward kid, and I got picked on all the time. This camp was no exception, but there was one kid who was relentless. We'll call him Sam. Sam was always pushing me around and calling me names constantly. I wouldn't even eat if he was still in the lunch area. One day we were in our cabin talking about how mean the other guys were, and I decided to seek revenge. I had to go to the bathroom badly, so I grabbed a plastic grocery bag and used it. I took the bag to the other cabin while the kids were out doing activities. I found Sam's bunk, grabbed a pair of his underwear, and shoved them down into the bag. After squishing it up again, I tucked it under Sam's mattress with a little bit of it hanging out. By the way, the stench was horrendous. Relieved I hadn't been caught, I ran back to our cabin. When the bullies came back in from playing, we could hear their disgust. It didn't take long for Sam to become the new target of endless teasing. Nobody wanted anything to do with the kid they thought had an accident. Guess who didn't get picked on for the rest of camp? Story 13. Not too crazy of a secret, but here it goes. When I was in high school, I didn't really have money to buy a yearbook. They cost like $60. I was in my art class when the school campus security came in with about 6 boxes of yearbooks. They set them on a counter and left. I knew right then I was getting a yearbook that day. This class had 2 doors, one from the hallway and one from the courtyard. Nobody ever used the courtyard door. It was always locked from the outside, one of those doors at restaurants that you push to open, no handles. We were allowed to leave from the courtyard door, but nobody could come in that way. Anyway, after class, I got some tape, left the room, and secretly put tape on the door's lock tongue so it wouldn't lock, and you could open it from the outside. I came back at lunch and opened the door like I was going in to talk to the teacher. I called his name and saw nobody was in there. After checking to see if the coast was clear, I opened a box and grabbed like 6 yearbooks. I got greedy. A girl walked in and caught me putting a yearbook in my backpack. She asked where the teacher was, and I said he went to the bathroom. She said she wanted to buy a yearbook. I grabbed one from the box and gave it to her. She offered me money and I said, "No, it's okay, take it." She was hesitant at first, but took it and said thanks. She left, then I left after stashing the 6 yearbooks. I stored them in my gym locker in case they searched backpacks. I was scared the rest of the day that I'd get called to the office. Thank goodness I didn't. At the end of the day, I went back to my locker and grabbed the yearbooks. I found my best friend and gave him one because I knew he couldn't afford one either. Then I found some other friends who were planning to buy yearbooks and sold 4 of them for $40 each instead of the $60 the school charged. I was a hero that day. I went home with $160 in my pocket and a yearbook. I felt guilty, but it was my senior year, and I wanted a yearbook, and my parents couldn't afford it. I ended up taking my parents to dinner that night. They asked where I got the money. I told them I had been saving. Story 14. Not particularly dark, but a secret regardless. And no throwaway, because I'm a badass. I had a wild night, let's call it a group experience, with my best friend Dave, his girlfriend Rachel, and one of her friends Gina. Names change because that's just what people do on the internet. A little bit of backstory. Dave had been in the military and met Rachel when he was stationed in another state. When he got out and moved back home, Rachel hadn't fully decided if she was going to move too. During that in-between period, Dave started secretly seeing Gina. Rachel ended up moving in the end and even became good friends with Gina, without knowing for the longest time that Gina and Dave had been hooking up for about a month before she arrived. Fast forward a few months, eventually the truth came out. To my surprise, Rachel took it pretty well, and somehow Dave even managed to turn it into a few three-person hangouts, if you catch my drift. Fast forward about a year, and Rachel had started developing a bit of a crush on me. By this point, I considered her a really close friend, not just my best friend's girlfriend. We even hung out alone sometimes, which might seem weird, but I'd never crossed the line with my best friend's partner, even though I strongly suspected there was something there. Then one night, the four of us were drinking and playing Mario Party, Rock Band, and a bunch of other fun games. Dave started getting flirty with Gina, and almost in response, Rachel got a little flirty with me. Dave noticed and seemed a little jealous, so it all cooled off for a bit. A few more games and a few more drinks later, Rachel suddenly dropped a bomb. She looked at Dave and said, "I know you want to hook up with Gina, and I'm okay with it, but if you do, I get to hang out with Storm 301. To say I was shocked would be an understatement. I'd known she had a crush on me for a while, but I never expected her to say something like that out loud, especially in front of everyone. What was even more surprising was that Dave agreed. It's a little fuzzy how things officially kicked off, but let's just say shortly after that, we were all getting along very well in opposite corners of the room. There may have been a few partner swaps, and let's just say we were all very much in sync. At one point, Rachel and I were paired off while Dave and Gina did their thing. There were definitely moments that felt straight out of a movie. I think the girls were impressed with my stamina, but in truth, I was just too tipsy to wrap things up quickly. Eventually, Dave called it a night and went to bed. Gina followed. Apparently, it wasn't unusual for her to crash in their room after nights like that. Rachel stayed up with me for a while, and we ended up talking, still laughing and decompressing after the whole experience. She eventually said we should take a shower since we were sweaty, and the night had been, well, a lot. That was the first time I'd ever showered with someone like that, and it was a whole new experience for me. A fun one, to say the least. Things happened again, and I was much more, let's say, productive the second time around. After the shower, we went to bed. The next morning, Dave kept going on and on about how I was, without a doubt, his best friend now until the end of time, because of everything that happened. He couldn't stop bringing it up all morning. But after that, none of us ever really mentioned it again. Story 15. When I was in 4th grade, I attended a middle school that had a forest about 3 square miles behind it. In the middle of that forest was a decent-sized pond, roughly 100 feet across. The school decided to set up a wildlife path throughout the area so students could walk around and learn about the plants and animals. For extra credit, students could volunteer to help with the project. I signed up immediately because that forest bordered my backyard, and I knew it like the back of my hand. I practically lived out there. I was so enthusiastic that a teacher even praised me to my parents for how excited I was about helping. Anyway, a couple of weeks after the trail was completed, a disturbing issue came up. Down near the pond, someone had started harming frogs and leaving them in plain sight. It was upsetting and confusing. The teachers knew I spent a lot of my free time in that forest and asked me to keep an eye out for whoever was responsible. I agreed without hesitation. But in the end, no one was ever caught. It was me. Story 16. Well, and this is probably going to get buried. When I was 13, I witnessed someone lose their life right in front of me. I was in Pakistan visiting family. We're from a region where there has been a lot of unrest, specifically the tribal areas. At the time, it wasn't as dangerous, especially since we stayed in a group and had some level of security thanks to relatives in the military. One weekend, we decided to visit family in a nearby village. As we were driving out of Peshawar, we came across a roadblock. The checkpoint had been set up by local militant forces, and they were performing a type of moral inspection. They were stopping every car and checking for things they considered improper. Music, unaccompanied women, and so on. We were next in line when my uncle suddenly told us to get rid of the car's radio. My cousin, who owned the car, hesitated. He had just bought the stereo and didn't want to lose it. While they were arguing, we noticed something happening at the car ahead of us. The men at the checkpoint were telling the driver to throw away his CDs, but the man refused, saying it was his right to listen to music. The argument escalated, and suddenly, they opened his car door, pulled him out, and moved his car aside. What happened next was horrifying. One of the men raised his weapon and pointed it at the man's head. The man shouted something loudly, and then it was over in seconds. It was loud, shockingly loud, and the entire moment happened so fast. Some people there even laughed. It didn't feel real. Even through my face covering, I remember how pink everything looked. When it was our turn, my cousin threw out his stereo system. We almost got in trouble because my mother and I were traveling with the group, but my uncle came up with a convincing explanation. I don't think it fully hit me at the time. I viewed it through the eyes of a child, like I was watching something on TV, not something real happening right in front of me. That's probably how I coped with it. Story 17. I had an uncle that I loved very much pass away a couple of years ago. He was probably one of the nicest people I've ever known. Just to give you some background, my family's full of drama, people who fight over money and don't always treat each other well. But I had some great memories with my uncle, especially since he owned a driving school and was the one who taught me how to drive. One night, I was in my dad's car with my aunt, who had divorced my uncle, and they were talking about how he had been diagnosed with colon cancer. I just sat there quietly, really sad, and I don't think they realized I was listening. Fast forward a few years and his condition had worsened. And me, being caught up in life, I hadn't really spoken to him much. Honestly, I think I had zero contact with him after that car ride I just mentioned. One day at work, I was helping with a task involving transporting a deceased person, and for some reason, I suddenly thought about calling my uncle. While I was walking to the bus from work, I pulled out my wallet to see if I still had his calling card in there, but it was gone. I really wanted to call him so badly. I'll never forget that feeling. Turns out that was his last full day alive. He passed away the next morning. That still hits hard sometimes. At the very least, he taught me how to be a good, decent man. I just hope I don't keep messing up. I'm trying. Story 18. Throwaway in high school, I sold drugs. That's not the shocking part. I was kind of known around school for being able to get anything. Rumors spread that I could get all sorts of things, and I didn't exactly deny them. It helped business. In reality, I mostly sold weed and ecstasy to bored rich kids. There was one kid, one of the wealthiest in school, who bought from me regularly. Weed, ecstasy, you name it. I didn't like him much, so I overcharged him a lot. He never complained. Then one day he asked for something heavier. He wanted Hero. I tried to steer him away from that. It wasn't something I liked dealing with, but he was persistent and handed me $100. So I went down the street to a neighbor who sold it. Nice guy despite the business. I bought about $50 worth and gave it to the kid the next day at school. Still not the worst part. The following day, the school was in mourning. The kid had passed away from an overdose. It hit the whole community hard. He was well known, popular, athletic, well-liked. The police launched an investigation, but no one pointed the finger at me. I was just one of a dozen people who sold, and I kept a low profile. Plus, I think some people were just afraid of me. The hardest part to admit? I didn't feel any guilt. I felt like he made his own choice, and I was just the middleman. I didn't lose sleep over it. No arrests were made, and life moved on. That money, it went straight into my college fund. Today, I'm a mechanical engineer. Story 19. When I was 13 years old, my parents decided to get a divorce. Due to my father struggling with severe mental health issues, my mom got custody of all of us kids. None of us were coping well, not with the divorce and not with the emotional toll of everything happening around us. It was a chaotic, overwhelming time. My mom started taking us to therapy. During one session, the therapist told her that I showed signs consistent with someone who had been through a serious traumatic experience. I had no memory of anything like that, and I made it clear to everyone that I hadn't been hurt in that way. But the therapist kept insisting otherwise. She believed I was just too ashamed to admit it, that I was suppressing the truth and needed encouragement and support to come forward. No matter how many times I denied it, the belief grew. After months of frustration, sadness, and feeling unheard, I gave up trying to correct them. It became easier to let them believe what they wanted. My voice was drowned out by a professional's opinion, and I was just a confused teen in their eyes. My mom, perhaps wanting someone else to blame for the family's struggles, accepted the theory fully. She told others, my siblings, her friends, church members, even parents of kids I knew. Suddenly, everything I had ever done or felt was reinterpreted. My personality wasn't just who I was, it had to be explained. And they decided this narrative explained it. I started losing friends. Not because they were cruel, but because I couldn't handle being treated like I was broken. Even that distance made people more certain I was struggling with something deeper and just wasn't ready to talk about it. On my 14th birthday, I got dozens of cards and gifts from people I'd never even met. It was overwhelming and isolating. A lie had been planted and was now rooted in every corner of my social world. Eventually, I stopped trying to argue. I shut down. I stayed in my room, avoiding everyone. I just didn't want to be told again and again that I needed to open up about something that had never happened. Then it reached my father. He was already dealing with his own serious struggles, including a complex mental health diagnosis. When the accusations reached him, through letters and phone calls, he began to question himself. He genuinely feared that he might have done something terrible without remembering. That year on Thanksgiving, he took his own life. I still carry that weight with me. I wish I had found a way to tell him the truth. I wish I had reached out, restraining order or not. But I didn't, and because of that, the truth was never shared with him. To this day, most of my family still believes that story. Some days, I nearly believed it myself. But I eventually went back through old diaries, through old memories, and reminded myself of the truth. My family holds on to a version of events that paints him as a villain. But I know the truth, and sometimes I still cry myself to sleep thinking about how silence, even when forced, can cost everything. Story 20. I moved to my current city 2 years ago, and I usually tell people that I did it because I was unhappy and wanted to start fresh. That's technically true, but it's not the whole truth. In my previous city, I was living a life I kept secret from everyone. I couldn't hold down a traditional job, and I made money in ways I never imagined I would. I used a fake name, a second phone, and kept everyone in my life at a distance. I told my friends I was financially set, and I told my family I had a great job. The truth is, I was living with someone much older who supported me financially in exchange for time and companionship. I stayed in his guest house, and we had an arrangement that involved regular visits in exchange for cash. I lived that way for 3 years, lying to everyone I knew. Eventually, the weight of the lies became too much. I packed up everything, moved to a new city where I didn't know anyone, and got a job working at a bar. Since then, I've been emotionally lost. I spent so long keeping people at a distance that I don't even know how to let anyone in anymore. I haven't talked to my parents or my sister in almost a year, and they still don't know why. I haven't made any friends outside of work in the 2 years I've been here. I struggle with being physically close to people. Sometimes I completely shut down, but other times I feel like I'm spiraling and make impulsive choices that leave me feeling even more empty. I know I need help, but I have no idea how to get it. I suspect I'm dealing with depression or something else, but I can barely afford groceries most weeks, let alone professional care. Therapy feels like a luxury. Some days I fantasize about finally getting the help I need, becoming healthy, and going home to my family as the version of me they always hoped for. Other days I just feel like disappearing. I'm still here though, still trying to figure things out. Story 21. I've been feeling like I'm at the end of my rope. Most days I'm caught in a constant mental tug of war between pushing forward toward a future I keep promising everyone will be bright and full of success, or just giving up entirely. It drains me, pretending every day to be okay, while internally I'm struggling with overwhelming thoughts that cloud everything else. I can't seem to focus on anything important. I've thought about what I'd say to everyone I care about if I ever decided to disappear. I've even mapped out a way to do it quietly, so no one would have to deal with a big mess. One day my friend asked what I was doing later, and without thinking I joked, killing myself. It was sarcastic, but something about saying it out loud made things feel too real. I went home that night, overwhelmed and unable to stop the flood of emotions. I cried until I passed out, waking up hours later to a soaked pillow and a pounding headache. I know I sound like I'm rambling, but it's eating away at me, and I just can't seem to find a way out. A big part of it is this fear I can't shake, the fear of being forgotten. I think about how in 100 years none of this will matter, and my name might not be remembered at all. That thought alone has crushed many of my hopes and dreams. Sorry if this is all over the place. I guess I just needed to let it out. I'm still here though, and I think that says something. Story 22. No point in using a throwaway since no one I know is on Reddit. I've got a few personal things to get off my chest. First, I constantly get those intrusive thoughts that people mention. Like, could I actually drive my car off this cliff? Or, what would my last thought be if I jumped from here? Or even, I could probably hurt this person and never get caught. I never act on them, but they come and go, and I've learned to brush them away. Still, it's unsettling. Second, I'm fairly sure I'm bipolar. It runs in my family. I definitely know I deal with depression. That part is crystal clear. Third, I have a couple of tattoos, quiet, personal ones. They mark the deaths of two of my closest friends. Very few people know that I was actually there when they passed. They both died by suicide. They didn't do it together. One happened in December 2005 and the other in February 2006. I found them both, held them both, and that changed me. I've been in a dark place more than once. I've tried to give up a couple of times, but something always stopped me at the last minute. After the third time, I took it as a sign that I wasn't meant to go out like that. So here I am. I'm not exactly happy with how my life has unfolded, but I'm proud of the person I've become. Because of everything I've been through, I'm now in a position to talk to others. Sometimes even help people who are going through their own moments of pain. Maybe that's my purpose. Story 23. I have too many. I grew up in foster care and never had an easy time trusting others. I always struggled with how to deal with some of the kids who came through the same home I lived in. There was one girl in particular who had been through something traumatic and would scream anytime a man entered the room. My brother and I weren't very kind to her. We once told her that a hornet's nest was a piñata, and she hid it. The aftermath wasn't pretty. She had a different social worker than we did, and eventually, after a big meeting, she was moved to a different home. I actually wanted to leave, but my brother didn't. She wanted out too, and she ended up being the one transferred. I once had a neighbor whose cat kept sitting on my new car. I was frustrated beyond reason. One day I did something I instantly regretted. The cat was near the creek behind our house, and after everything happened, I realized the neighbor's child had been nearby. She ran off crying. The whole thing still sits heavy with me, even though no one found out. I didn't expect to laugh while typing this, but sometimes nerves do weird things to you. In high school, things got darker. My best friend got involved with someone who claimed to have connections to organized crime. I thought it was just talk until we witnessed something in Rochester that still hasn't been solved to this day. It scared me into silence. Later in life, after my house had been broken into more than once, I rigged a kind of booby trap using bear spray and a loose stairway to the basement. I left empty TV boxes in plain sight to bait a return visit. Sure enough, I came home to find someone in the basement, half conscious, dazed, and clearly hurt. I didn't want trouble, so I dropped him off anonymously at a hospital in a rougher part of town. I didn't want to be found liable for anything. These days, I keep my head down. I've done a better job staying out of trouble in recent years. I guess I've learned where the line is and how close I'm willing to get to it. Story 24. I'm sure some people can relate to this, but here goes. I have a hard time with my mother. She believes she's always right and sees everyone else as being beneath her. For as long as I can remember, she's criticized me and my siblings constantly about our appearance, our personalities, our lives. It's been like that since I was around 8 years old. One memory still stings. When I was 13, I decided to try losing weight and started working out to a fitness video. About a week in, my mom came into my room angry because she had misplaced something. While I was mid-workout, she looked at me and said, "I don't know why you bother. You're always going to be fat." That one sentence shattered my motivation, and I didn't try to work out again for 2 years. She talks down to everyone, my dad included. He works hard as a construction superintendent, putting in long hours and making a good living. My mom works fewer hours and earns much less, but constantly insists she works harder than he ever did. The only one who avoids her harsh words is the youngest sibling. They're alike in personality and argue constantly, But my mom never disciplines her. One time she got caught trespassing and had to do community service. But there were no consequences at home. Just last week, my mom spent almost $900 on school clothes for her. Meanwhile, when I was 19, I got a few grooming products for Christmas while most of the budget went to my youngest sibling. I once talked to my dad about how she treats everyone, and he just said he's only staying until we all move out. After that, he doesn't know what will happen. These days, I keep my conversations with her polite and minimal. I never talk about anything personal beyond school or work. What makes it harder is remembering that she wasn't always like this. Seeing how someone changes over time, especially when it's your own parent, is both strange and painful. Story 25. Since I was a little girl, I never really had imaginary friends, or real ones for that matter. I grew up mostly alone with my dad. He was a good man and never harmed me, but he worked a lot. I was shy and didn't have many people around, so I created companions in my mind to keep me company. They talked to me, encouraged me, and helped me feel less alone. As I got older, around 12, I started making real friends, but the voices never left. In fact, they seemed to grow up with me. They developed personalities, names, and individual traits. By the time I was 14, it felt like I was sharing space in my mind with a few distinct people. Now at 18, only a few of my close friends know. I've tried to understand what's happening on my own. Some think it's a kind of personality condition or something similar. I'm not really sure. I've never seen a therapist because I can't afford it. And to be honest, I'm scared that if I did, they might not understand and could even want to hospitalize me. But here's the thing. They're not harmful. They don't tell me to do bad things or scare me. It's more like having extra people in my head who try to help me through tough times. They offer advice. They're there when others aren't, and they feel like part of me in a strange way. I know this probably sounds weird and maybe even unbelievable, but it's real to me. I'm not dangerous and I'm not unstable. I just experience life a little differently. Story 26. This might get buried, but whatever. I just want to get this off my chest. I have a friend I play video games with. We're part of a group that plays together regularly, and we chat over Skype. I'll call him Tim. One day during one of our group calls, he adds his cousin to the chat. Let's call his cousin Mike. Mike was a cool guy, kind of crude, but nothing too out of the ordinary. We all hung out for about an hour and a half. He said goodbye and left the call like normal. I took a break to have dinner and came back about 5 hours later. I got back online and started chatting with Tim. As soon as he answered, I could tell something was wrong. I asked him what was up, and he told me that Mike had been going through a tough time. He lived in a mid-sized city near Detroit, where there are a lot of youth issues, including mental health and substance abuse. That day, Mike had taken a mix of prescription medication, crushed and dissolved in water. Tim told me that Mike didn't want to talk to him. He just wanted to be left alone. I was panicking. I asked him for Mike's number and called him myself. He eventually picked up. I didn't know him well, but I told him his life mattered. That even though I'd only just met him, I cared. That everyone goes through dark moments, but there's always something worth holding on to. Somehow I got through to him. He agreed to try and get the pills out of his system. It had only been about 5 minutes. He took something to induce vomiting and managed to throw up the mixture. I stayed on the phone with him afterward, encouraging him to talk to me if he ever felt overwhelmed again. I reminded him that life has value, even when it feels impossible. I'll never forget that night. Story 27. Throwaway for obvious reasons. Growing up, I always dreamed of becoming an artist. I loved drawing and painting, but was steered into graphic design because it was seen as the practical career. So at 18, I entered the field. At first it was exciting, but the long hours, the pressure, and the culture wore me down fast. I was working 15 to 18-hour days and started drinking to cope. Eventually, I just walked out of the office one day, went to the pub, and never went back. At 25, I moved back in with my parents. They gave me my old room, and I pretty much isolated myself completely. I only came out to get food or restock my supply of gin. I was drinking about 2 liters a day. I'd pass out, wake up, and drink again. I was completely lost. Looking back, I can't believe what I put my parents through. They didn't talk about it, just quietly endured the fact that their adult child was upstairs in a dark place. I'd get flashbacks of drunkenly stumbling downstairs, talking nonsense, or crying uncontrollably in front of them. After a few years of this, I finally sought counseling. I managed to get sober and started cleaning up the disaster I had been living in. My room was in a horrible state. I threw out everything that reminded me of that time. I even found a stash of old photos I had taken during that period, and I could barely recognize the person in them. It was a harsh wake-up call. The most difficult realization was that my mom probably went into my room looking for signs of drugs. She never found anything illegal, but I'm sure she saw things no parent should ever have to see. That thought still haunts me. Now I'm 39. I've been sober for 12 years. I have a steady job, a loving partner, and kids. I still struggle with depression, but it's managed. I'm not proud of that chapter in my life, but I've come a long way, and I know I'll never go back there again. Story 28. When I got expelled from high school during my junior year, and my younger sister was sent to an alternative school, my dad took it really hard. My sister refused to talk to him, something that's still ongoing, and he was already feeling emotional about how the school system had treated me. Something to know about my dad. When he gets upset, he sometimes says harsh things out of frustration. My mom was worried he might lash out at the school administrators during my appeal process and hurt my chances. That suggestion upset him even more. He felt like no one trusted him. One morning not long after the expulsion, he didn't go to work. When I went upstairs, I found him in bed crying. He had a revolver on his chest and was quietly running the bullets through his hands, saying that he was a terrible father and that nobody in the family loved or trusted him. I spent the next 2 hours sitting with him, telling him how much I loved him, how important he was to all of us, and how none of us would be okay without him. Eventually, he said he wanted to be alone to sleep. I spent the rest of that day constantly checking in on him every hour. It was the worst day of my life. The only person I've ever shared this with is my sister. Until now. Story 29. This story has stuck with me for a while. A few years ago, I worked in the meat department of a grocery store. It was summer, and the heat was intense. One afternoon, I was working my usual shift when I saw a man collapse near the pharmacy department, about 30 feet in front of me. He was a large man, and it appeared to be a heat-related incident. I had a valid CPR certification, and I think I was the only person in the store who did. But instead of running to help right away, I stepped into the cooler and found myself quietly chuckling at the way he had fallen. I know how that sounds. It wasn't the situation itself, but just the suddenness of it that triggered a weird reaction. Nobody else stepped up to give him aid, and no doctors were present. To this day, I don't know how things turned out for him. I questioned myself afterward. Why did I laugh? Why didn't I immediately rush to help? It made me reflect on my own mindset and how I react under pressure. I still think about that moment. Story 30. This might not sound as bad as it felt, but for a period of my childhood, I truly struggled with how I felt about my father. He was never outwardly abusive, but discipline in our house often came in the form of slaps on the head or arm, and that left a mark on how I saw him. He could go from angry and shouting to completely calm and polite when guests were around. That shift in mood was hard to process as a kid. He overreacted to small things, like forgetting to do the dishes, and would yell or call me names. He once called me something awful over a small mistake, and then stayed grumpy about it for 2 weeks. Even today, his mood dictates how everyone else behaves when he's home. I remember seeing my younger sister crying while he disciplined her, and I felt powerless hiding in my room. My mom always told me that he loves us, but he's never said it directly. I know he works hard for our family, but I also know the fear-based environment has had a long-term effect on me, and probably my sister too. He's taught me something valuable, though. I've learned exactly how I don't want to treat people. I wish I could say all of this to his face, but I know I wouldn't be able to do it without breaking down. Story 31. I've been separated from my ex for about 4 years, officially divorced for just under 3. In that time, there were many incidents where the police had to be called due to conflicts between us. I had to get a criminal trespass warning for him at my home. He showed up at my job once and had to be escorted off the property. Eventually, I blocked his number and stopped all contact. Despite all this, the police often viewed the situation as a civil matter. I tried going through lawyers to modify custody arrangements, but faced endless obstacles. Sometimes he'd go months without picking up the kids or show up at midnight without notice. My children were also affected, getting suspended from school, kicked out of daycare, and needing counseling. I spent a year taking them to therapy, meeting with teachers, principals, and counselors weekly, And still, nothing seemed to improve. There were even two back-to-back child welfare cases, one of which lasted an entire year. One night he came to the house during his visitation time, yelling, screaming, dumping out potted plants. My kids opened the door, and legally he could take them. And he did. The next time he came to return them, I wasn't there. I wasn't there the next day either. He filed a missing persons report. The police found me at work and tried to talk me out of it, but legally they couldn't do much. Since then, it's been 2 months. I haven't seen or heard from him or the kids, and he hasn't filed anything with the court to change that. People still ask how my kids are doing, how school's going for them. I just smile and say they're fine. I play along when my boss says I should go home and spend time with them. Because I know if anyone found out, they'd judge me. They'd ask, what kind of mother would walk away from her kids? So I lie, because the truth is too complicated. Story 32. This is something I've never told anyone. On November 17th, 2011, I went out for a night run. I'm a marathoner, and I was about 7 miles in. I rounded a corner, and then suddenly everything went black. I came to with half my body in a water ditch and the other half on the roadside. I had no idea where I was or what had happened. Eventually, a woman drove by, then turned around and came over to me. She kept asking me questions, but I couldn't hear her voice, just saw her lips moving. At some point, I rolled over toward the ditch, and suddenly everything turned white. I was no longer lying on the ground. I was standing upright. There was a person standing about 5 feet from me, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. She was beautiful. When I noticed her, I was overcome by this feeling of peace and warmth. The next thing I remember, I was back on the ground, and an EMT was performing CPR. I had been clinically dead for 6 minutes. To this day, they don't know exactly what happened. The doctors think it might have been a combination of exhaustion, low blood sugar, and low protein. The woman who found me later said she had an odd feeling that made her take a different route home that night. As for the woman I saw when I crossed over, I don't know who she is, but I've always felt that I'm supposed to meet her someday. I don't know when or how, but I feel like she's meant to be my future wife. She saved me before we ever met. I remember thinking, I can't go yet. I need to live and marry this woman. Not a dark secret, but something that's lived in my heart ever since. Story 33. This is something I've never told anyone. When I was in elementary school, there was an old building on campus with a basement-like crawl space that was only accessible through a mesh metal cover outside. One day, curiosity got the best of me, and during recess, I brought a flashlight to peek inside. What I found surprised me: blankets, toys, and signs that someone, likely a child, had been living there. For some reason, I felt a deep need to return and leave something behind. I picked out a toy and donated it to the collection inside the crawl space. Later that day, I noticed an older girl inspecting the area, quietly poking at the mesh. She looked like she wanted to crawl in. That's when it hit me. She might have been living there. A runaway, maybe homeless. I never saw her again after that. The next day, everything in the crawl space was gone. I think I might have accidentally exposed her hiding place. To this day, I regret not telling an adult. She was incredibly young and probably could have been helped, but I was 7 years old and didn't really understand what to do. I've always carried that moment with me. I had the chance to help someone, and I didn't. Story 34. I had great opportunities and incredible parents who supported me in every way. They wanted me to become a doctor or pharmacist, and honestly, I wanted that too. I went through 4 different colleges, trying to make it work, but I struggled. During that time, I became deeply passionate about powerlifting. Eventually, that passion turned into an obsession, and I started using performance-enhancing substances. I moved in with someone I knew through the lifting community, and while I focused on training in school, he was involved with other things, including recreational drug use. I tried to stay away from that part of it, keeping my head down and working toward my degree. Despite the chaos, I managed to get a sponsorship and was just 2 semesters away from completing my biology degree. Then everything changed. A package of performance-enhancing substances arrived, and I was arrested. Because of the quantity, I was charged with felony trafficking. To make things worse, the authorities found other substances in the house, things I had no idea were there. But my name was on the lease, so I was held responsible. I ended up with charges for possession and more. Fortunately, due to my clean record, I was placed in a diversion program. If I pass regular drug testing over 2 years, the charges will be dismissed and my record cleared.